My grandfather used to say that every patch of dirt on this planet has a secret. He was a farmer in Kansas, a man who understood the earth in a way most people never will. He could read the stories it held in the layers of soil. Arrowheads from the Kaw Nation, rusted tools from the Dust Bowl, the fossilized bones of creatures that walked these plains when Kansas was an inland sea. He thought he knew all the stories this land could tell. He was wrong. The secret buried under our family's western cornfield was older, darker, and infinitely more alien than any dinosaur. My name is Jake Miller. After a less than glorious discharge from the Army Corps of Engineers, I came home to the flat, endless plains of Kansas to take over the family farm. It was a quiet life, a self-imposed penance for past mistakes. The loudest sound for miles was the wind rustling through the cornstalks, a dry, whispering hiss that could drive a man mad if he listened too closely. The biggest excitement was a thunderstorm rolling in from the west, the sky turning a bruised purple. That all changed during the Great Drought of 24. The earth grew hard as iron. The corn withered on the stalk. To save the farm, I had to do what my father and grandfather, with their stubborn faith in the sky, never had: drill a new, deeper well. I cashed in the last of my savings and hired a local crew with a ground-penetrating radar rig to find the best spot to tap into the Ogallala Aquifer. The call came on a blistering July afternoon, the kind of day where the air itself seems to shimmer and warp. The crew's foreman, a grizzled man named Hank whose skin was the color and texture of tanned leather, sounded rattled. It took a lot to rattle Hank. "Mr. Miller, you better get out here to the west field. We've found something. Down about 100 feet, it's metal, big, and it ain't a pipeline or a buried tractor." I drove my beat-up truck out to the location, the tires kicking up clouds of fine red dust. The GPR screen in Hank's air-conditioned rig showed a long, cigar-shaped object that made absolutely no sense. It was over 200 feet long, perfectly symmetrical. "That's a geological anomaly," I said, trying to force the image into a logical box. "A magnetic iron deposit, a lodestone. Iron deposits don't have bulkheads, a deck gun, and a conning tower," Hank replied grimly, pointing at the detailed scan. He was right. The shape was unmistakable. It was a submarine. A submarine in the middle of landlocked Kansas, 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean, buried under 100 feet of solid earth and sedimentary rock that hadn't seen a drop of water in 65 million years. The news, when it inevitably leaked, turned our quiet farm into a circus. First the local sheriffs, then the state police, and finally the government. Men in dark, unmarked sedans that looked alien on our dusty farm roads. They were from a department that didn't officially exist, a shadowy organization tasked with handling things that weren't supposed to exist. They called themselves the Anomalous Historical Artifacts Unit, or HAU. Their leader was a cold, pragmatic man named Director Thorne, whose face seemed incapable of expressing any emotion other than tired impatience. He didn't offer explanations. He gave orders. My farm became a classified archaeological site overnight. They brought in heavy excavation equipment, massive earth movers that dwarfed my tractors, and for 2 weeks, they dug the largest hole I had ever seen under a shroud of absolute secrecy. And at the bottom of it, sitting in the dry Kansas dirt, was the impossible. It was a German Type 9 U-boat from World War II. The steel hull was pitted and scarred, not from battle, but from what looked like atmospheric re-entry. There was no rust. The air of Kansas was too dry. The markings on the conning tower were faint but clear. U-1881. Thorne's team of historians and analysts were baffled, their hushed whispers echoing across the dig site. "There's no record of a U-1881. One of them, a young woman with wide, terrified eyes, told me. "The Kriegsmarine production line stopped in the 900s. This boat, officially, it was never built." The mystery deepened when the engineers tried to open it. The main hatch on the conning tower wouldn't budge. It wasn't just locked or rusted shut. It was welded. From the inside, someone or something had sealed themselves in. They hadn't wanted to get out. They had wanted to keep something else from getting in. They had to cut their way through the hull. I stood beside Thorn on the edge of the pit, the Kansas wind whipping dust around us. As a specialized team in full hazmat suits used a plasma torch to slice a perfect rectangular opening in the side of the sub. The air that hissed out wasn't stale. It was unnaturally cold, a blast of Arctic air that carried a faint, metallic, ozone-like smell. I was allowed to go in with the first team. My engineering background made me useful, but I knew the real reason. Thorn wanted to keep me close. It was my farm, my secret. He didn't trust me. The inside of the U-boat was a crypt. A thick layer of frost covered every surface, glittering under our powerful helmet lights. The air was frigid, far colder than the ambient temperature outside should have allowed. The layout was standard for a Type 9. Cramped, claustrophobic corridors, a nightmarish maze of pipes, valves, and dials. But it was the crew that made my blood run cold. They were all there, all 53 of them, frozen solid in the instantaneous, unnatural cold. They weren't at their posts. They were huddled together in the central control room, piled against the far bulkhead, as far away from the forward torpedo room as they could possibly get. Their faces were masks of pure, unadulterated terror. Their eyes were wide open, their mouths locked in silent screams. They weren't looking at each other, or at the hatch we had just cut. They were all staring, with a singular, unified horror, at the sealed, watertight door that led to the bow of the ship. "What the hell happened here?" one of the soldiers with us muttered, his voice trembling over the comms. Thorn was a statue of calm amidst the chaos, his face unreadable. He knelt beside the frozen captain, whose hand was still clutching the ship's logbook. With delicate, painstaking care, a specialist used a portable thermal tool to thaw the book from the captain's dead grip. The pages were perfectly preserved in the cold, dry air. The script, written in German, was a frantic, terrified scrawl that became more and more unhinged with each entry. Thorn's translator, a pale young man who looked like he was about to be sick, read the final entries aloud, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the sub. October 1944. The artifact is active. It is singing. A sound that is not a sound. It gets inside your head, in the spaces between thoughts. The men are having nightmares. They see twisted geometries, impossible cities under black suns. Klaus went mad last night. Smashed the radio with a wrench, screaming about voices in the static. Tried to open a torpedo tube to let the starlight in. We had to restrain him. November 1944. We can't escape it. We surfaced in a storm. The stars were wrong, all wrong. I know the sky like the back of my hand, and those were not our constellations. We dived, went deep as she would go. But the thing we brought aboard, it doesn't care about the ocean. It is connected to somewhere else. It is a door, and it is opening. December 1944. We are lost, not at sea. Somewhere else. Somewhere dry. The periscope shows only a field of endless dust under a black sky with no stars. The engines are dead. The batteries are dead. But the artifact, it pulses. It is calling something. We can feel it coming across the void. We have sealed the forward chamber. We have welded the hatch from the inside. May God forgive us. It is not a weapon. It is an anchor. It has pulled our world into its own. The artifact. The log confirmed it. They had brought something aboard. Something they found in the deep Atlantic. Something that had dragged them through space and time and stranded them in a Kansas field that wouldn't exist for another 80 years. All eyes turned to the sealed, reinforced door of the forward torpedo room. The soldiers set up a portable scanner. The readings were nonsensical. The space inside the room was dimensionally unstable. The scanner showed the room as being both infinitesimally small and infinitely large at the same time. The temperature reading was a single flashing error, below absolute zero. A cold that shouldn't be possible. Thorne, after a long, tense silence, made the decision. We have to see what's in there. Open it. It took them an hour to cut through the reinforced door. The plasma torch seemed to struggle, the energy absorbed by the strange cold. As the final section of metal fell away, the cold intensified. It poured out of the doorway like a physical wave, a tangible entity of cold that bit through our insulated suits and made our teeth ache. The forward torpedo room was wrong. The walls were coated in a strange, black, crystalline frost that seemed to absorb the light from our lamps, creating a disorienting, light-swallowing effect. The 4 torpedo tubes were intact, their hatches sealed. And in the center of the room, on the loading rack where a torpedo should have been, was the artifact. It was a perfect 2-meter sphere of a material that looked like obsidian. But it wasn't solid. It was a fluid, constantly shifting, its surface swirling with slow, hypnotic, geometric patterns that made my head ache to look at. It didn't reflect our light. It seemed to inhale it, and at its core, a single point of cold, purple light pulsed like a malevolent, sleeping eye. As we stared, mesmerized, the scraping sound began. It was a faint, rhythmic sound, the sound of metal on metal. It was coming from inside one of the torpedo tubes. Scrape, pause, scrape. One of the soldiers, a young corporal barely out of his teens, slowly approached torpedo tube number 3, the source of the sound, his rifle raised. "Corporal, stand down," Thorne ordered, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. But the man was transfixed, his movements slow and dreamlike. He reached out and placed his gloved hand on the circular hatch of the tube. The scraping stopped, and then a single, thunderous bang erupted from inside the tube, as if something massive had thrown itself against the inner hatch. The entire submarine shuddered. The corporal screamed and stumbled back. A large convex dent was now visible in the thick steel. The sphere in the center of the room began to pulse faster, the purple light within it brightening. A thought bloomed in my mind, cold and sharp as ice. It wasn't my own. It was a single, pure alien concept. Hungry. Bang. Another impact, stronger this time. The heavy locking mechanism on the torpedo tube began to groan and bend under the strain. "What is in there?" a soldier yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Thorne's face was pale as death, his scientific curiosity finally extinguished by pure terror. The log said the artifact was an anchor. It didn't just bring the submarine here. It brought a piece of somewhere else with it. That tube, it's not a torpedo tube anymore. It's a doorway. Starving, the thought echoed in my skull, more insistent this time, filled with a predatory, triumphant glee. Bang! Crack! The steel of the hatch began to fracture. We could see a dark, oily, non-reflective liquid beginning to seep through the cracks, a substance that sizzled and steamed as it hit the frosted deck, neither freezing nor boiling. "We have to get out," I yelled, pulling my sidearm. "Seal the room, now!" But it was too late. With a final, ear-splitting shriek of tearing metal, the torpedo tube hatch was ripped from its hinges, not outwards, but inwards into the dark, impossible space of the tube. For a moment, there was only darkness from the opening, a perfect, silent void, and then a thing began to emerge. It was a nightmare of mismatched anatomy, a long, segmented, insect-like body made of the same iridescent black chitin as the sphere. It pulled itself out with multiple, razor-sharp crab-like legs that scrabbled for purchase on the deck, each step sounding like breaking glass. It had no head, but the front of its torso opened like a grotesque flower, revealing a circular, rotating maw of needle-like teeth that spun with a low, hungry whine. And it was big. Too big to have ever fit inside the tube. It was pulling its impossible, dimensionally distorted body out of a space that should not have been able to contain it. The sphere pulsed violently, and a wave of pure, triumphant hunger washed over us. It was the creature's master, the anchor, and it had just brought its pet home for dinner. The soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds slammed into the creature's chitinous hide, creating bright flashes of light, but doing little more than chipping its hide. The thing let out a high-pitched shriek, a sound that was both auditory and psychic, a scream that I felt in the marrow of my bones. It lunged forward, its movements impossibly fast and fluid, and seized the young corporal in its spinning maw. I will not describe what happened to him. The sounds will be with me for the rest of my life. We fell back, firing wildly as we retreated from the torpedo room. The creature was pulling more and more of its endless body through the portal, its claws scraping deep gouges in the steel deck. The sphere! Thorn screamed over the chaos. The anchor! We have to sever the connection. Jorik, your engineering expertise. Is there a way to overload the sub's power systems? A focused electromagnetic pulse? I looked around at the ancient frozen machinery, my mind racing. The batteries are dead, but the torpedoes, they're electric. They have massive silver-zinc batteries. If we can bypass the safeties on one of the aft torpedoes and detonate the warhead, the resulting energy surge might disrupt the sphere's dimensional link. It was a suicide mission. We were trapped in a metal tube with a monster from another dimension, and our only plan was to set off an explosion. We fell back to the aft torpedo room, sealing the watertight doors behind us. We could hear the creature battering against them, its psychic shrieks of rage and hunger battering against our minds. Sam, who had come in with the second team, was already there, his face grim. I heard the plan. It's insane. I love it. But we have to bypass the launch safeties and manually overload the battery to detonate the warhead. It'll take 2 people. Thorn looked at me, his cold, professional demeanor finally cracking, revealing the terrified man beneath. You 2 go. My team will hold them off here as long as we can. I nodded, a silent thanks passing between us. Sam and I climbed onto the torpedoes, our hands flying across the control panels, bypassing century-old safety mechanisms that were never meant to be touched. The creature's impacts on the door grew stronger, the steel beginning to buckle and tear. It's now or never, Jorik, Sam yelled, his voice strained. We hit the final override. A high-pitched whine filled the room as the torpedo's battery began to overload. Run! We scrambled out of the aft torpedo room, just as Thorn and his men were overwhelmed by the creature bursting through the door. We didn't look back. We ran through the frozen, shadow-haunted corridors of the U-boat as the countdown in our heads reached 0. The explosion was not a loud bang, but a deep, resonant thump that shook the entire submarine from bow to stern. A wave of pure, white energy washed through the corridors, and for a moment, the 80 screaming shadows on the walls flared with a brilliant, blinding light, as if they were finally being released. We scrambled out of the hull breach and back into the dry Kansas air. The psychic screaming had stopped. The ground was still. We stood on the edge of the pit, panting, watching the submarine. After a long moment of silence, the black, crystalline frost that coated the interior of the forward torpedo room began to recede. The impossible cold was dissipating. The connection had been severed. The U-1881 is now encased in a kilometer of concrete. buried back under my cornfield. Director Thorne and his unit classified the event as a geological survey gone wrong. The dead soldiers were listed as training casualties. The world will never know what we found. But I know. I still have nightmares. Not of the creature, but of the sphere, the anchor. I know it's still down there, sleeping in its concrete tomb. Its connection is broken, but it is patient. And sometimes, when the wind blows hard across the plains, I think I can hear a faint scraping sound coming from deep beneath the earth. The sound of something waiting. The sound of something hungry.